Hey guys, so this is a very spontaneous video. I was just talking to someone about antinatalism, and they asked me about antinatalism. Why are you an antinatalist? I was trying to come up with an argument. And if you're like me, I never had an argument that is effective, but at the same time casual enough that you can just throw it in and talk with someone. Like, I mean, we do have nice arguments like the asymmetry argument, but it's just too technical and it takes time for you to prepare the argument. And if you go into like a kind of fast argument, like, hey, life is bad or whatever, it just is not persuasive enough, because they can come back with lots of different objections to that sort of compassion way of looking at things. And I never had a kind of, a go-to argument that I start a conversation with that. But when I was having the conversation, the way that I replied to him, I started thinking about it. I was like, okay, that was a very interesting way of putting it. I've never done that before. It was just on the moment, and he also has a very interesting subtle points that it was very nice for me, and now this has become my interesting argument. At least it's not a new argument, but it's just a new form of putting it. Yeah, because in the end, the arguments are all come down to the same thing. But anyway. So this is how I answered to him. He said, "Okay, why are you an antinatalist?" And I said, "Okay, look, first, I also went to like kind of premise like argumentation. So I said, okay, premise one, life is a big project. It's just time consuming, energy consuming. It requires a lot of effort. And two, if something is a big project, we should not impose it on others. In other words, if something is a big project, imposing it on others is an immoral act. It means that they have become the victim of an immoral act, of a cruel act. We should not do that. And by combining these two, what we get is that if we impose life on someone, because life is a big project, then we have created a victim of a cruel act, of an immoral act. But on the other hand, if that basically is procreation. So if we create, procreation necessarily implies the creation of a victim of such a cruel act. Antinatalism is reducing the number of victims of a cruel act. That's an immoral agent. That's what an immoral agent should do, right? Reduce the number of victims of cruelty, of immoral acts. But if procreation necessarily means creation of a victim, and if you want to reduce that number or basically make it zero, then that basically means that we shouldn't procreate, Like the way that I put it in that sense, it was very simple and it was very effective, at least in my point of view. And it also has very interesting points about it. The first thing is that it doesn't mention the non-existent beings at all. It focuses more on the real issue, which are the real existing victims of procreation. And that's all of us, right? So if we, in the previous premises, we get to the point to say that, hey, coming into being is essentially a harm, but the way that I put it is that if coming to being is to become a victim of an immoral act, then we're just trying to reduce the victims that exist, We're not talking about non-existent things. We're talking about actual existence. So every baby that you see, every person that you see is a victim of a cruel act. So let us act on it. Let's reduce that number. Let's do something about it. But what should we do? If procreation implies creation of that victim, then if you don't want to have the victim, then we shouldn't create. So that by focusing on that, on the existing thing, it just throws away all the talk about, okay, how can we do something good for someone who doesn't exist and all those issues. On the other hand, the argument doesn't really have many premises that one can attack, because the first premise that that life is a big project that requires a lot of energy and effort is something that I guess no one will deny. Even if you're an optimistic person, you will still believe that life is a big project, right? But the difference is that people who are happy with life, they will be like, yeah, it's a big project, but it's an amazing project. I love it. It takes a lot of time. It takes a lot of effort. It's very hard to do, but I love it. It's amazing, right? So I don't think anyone will deny that one. That life is a big project that it requires lots of effort. So the only premise, and the rest of the argument is just, logical entailment. There's nothing complicated in there. The only premise that one can attack is this premise that if something is a big project, if something is time consuming and requires a lot of effort, then we should not impose it on others. In other words, we shouldn't push others into that experience or into that project without their consent. And look, we're not talking about life here. We're just talking about a project, a big experience. And they might come up and say, okay, but why? Why is that? But first of all, we cannot throw this away completely as a general rule. Why? And now I came back, and this is also during the conversation. In a couple of videos back, I was talking about antinatalism, and I came up with this kind of example of psychedelics. And I reused it here, and it was a very apt example to use here. I said, okay, look, can I put psychedelics in your food without you knowing it? And I guess the answer is no. That would be a wrong thing. That would be a bad thing to do. But it's the same formulation, right? Why? Because taking psychedelics and going on a trip is a big project. You will go through lots of experiences. You have to experience a lot of things, process a lot of things. And it's a big project. It takes hours for you to complete. And it's not an easy thing, an easy experience to go through. And that's why we don't impose that experience on other people. We don't force people into that project without their consent. But if you throw away such a rule, then basically we have nothing against, for example, forcing people to take psychedelics or going into more violent cases such as rape or other things. Because if you have an experience which is rough and tough and time consuming, and if you say, hey, maybe we can impose it without their consent on someone else, then that opens up a lot of bad things. But this example and this formulation also answers one of the key objections to antinatalism. And that's when they hit you back with, because if you tell someone that, hey, life is a big project, so we shouldn't impose it on others, some people might say, well, actually, I'm fine with it. Even though it's imposed on me, I'm not a victim. So that's the objection that would be. They would be like, okay, you're saying that every single person is a victim. But I'm not a victim. I don't feel like a victim. And the thing is, that really doesn't matter. Because if we go back to the psychedelic example, imagine that I force psychedelics on you. I put it in your food, you don't know about it. You go on a trip. And during that trip, you actually enjoy your trip. And I tell you later on, hey, like I just put it in your food and without your consent. And they will be like, yes, it's great. I'm loving it. The point is, does that make my putting psychedelics in your food without your consent a good thing? I don't think so. That's the only tricky part that remains. And I believe that the antinatalism, I believe, comes down to this point. What is your ethics on this thing? For me, even if you enjoy your psychedelic trip, it was still wrong for me to put it in your food without your consent. If you agree with me, then the road to antinatalism, I guess, is just straight. But if you don't agree with that, then you're going to have problems because you need to justify a lot of things. Because that's basically saying that, okay, if you force something on someone else and they enjoy it, that might actually justify your doing it. But what about more horrible cases? Can I put someone in jail without their consent, hoping that they might like it? And if they like it, does that mean that I didn't do anything wrong? If you rape someone, and we know somehow that they further on down the road, we realize that they actually liked it. Does that mean that the rape that you did was okay? I don't think so. And I don't think that's a controversial issue either. So I believe this is a very simple point, that even if you enjoy it, so that's the point. So someone comes back and says, "Hey, I'm not a victim." You are a victim, and it doesn't matter if you like being here or not. The point is that life has been imposed on you. And that's a wrongdoing from your parents. And if you do that to someone else, you will do an immoral act, and it doesn't matter if they like it or not. Imposing a project on someone else without their consent, a project that takes a lot of time, energy, not to mention not even pains. You see, so that's the interesting part about this whole part of argument, that I didn't bring in lots of concepts like a pain or pleasure, none of that, or non-existence of things, none of that. Or even the fact that people actually judge their lives much better than the life actually is. I don't think we need any of that to make it actually a strong case. So yeah, anyway, this formulation actually increased my confidence in antinatalism, because we don't need to go into details of very technical arguments, or just go with our intuition and compassion and try to persuade the other person that, hey, it's just a bad thing to do. I guess we can actually have a very nice argument based on the principles that I just mentioned. So cheers.